Hello, everybody. And as the camera will probably tell in the YouTube video, we are in a different classroom. I don't know what's up with the class camera in this room. I don't have the video panel. I'm gonna show you guys. You can kind of see, like, look at this. Look at this. I kind of look like an angel, you know? This is ridiculous. Yeah, so camera for some reason is not the best camera, but we'll make do. Just for context, Dr. Caden is her business administration 153 students are taking their quiz in our normal classroom. The only reason that she asked it is that apparently they did a massive update on the campus-wide systems, and whenever they do updates, it takes forever for Excel to open up in 1432. So she made the request of me. She actually made it at 10:30 last night, which I was asleep at 10:30 last night, which kind of shows you the hours I keep and the hours Dr. Caden keeps. So we worked it out this morning, which is why I had such a late email, because we didn't actually get it resolved until after my first class. So thank you very much for your patience on that and your diligence. I don't know what the classroom situation will look like for the last few weeks of class. The good news is that I don't think that I don't anticipate anything will change for this week, the rest of this week, or for week 14. We may be in a different classroom for the presentations, just because it's a little bit easier for people to present in classrooms like this than in another classroom. I will tell you right now, the other classroom is great for having access to technology tools. It is miserable for lecturing because half the students are just like this right here. Yeah. So yeah, it's nothing quite like lecturing to computer screens, and I would kind of like to avoid that. That being said, I don't really want to rock the boat. If Dr. Caden wants wants a classroom for one of those days, we may present in here. I don't have any plans to move all the presentations in here, so that's going to be the case. Reminder, we have an exam on Monday. The exam is written, it is all prepared, as are the study guide and the practice exam. We will do our exam review on Friday. Remember, the process for the exam review is that I will go over the study guide. I will not go over it in detail. I will go over some high points that I think are relevant. It is imperative. There we go. That's the word I'm looking for. I was going to say contingent and imperative, and I put impingent, which is not a word. It's imperative upon you. If you have questions about content in the study guide that you want specific explanation on, that you need to come to class prepared to ask those questions. I will be available over the weekend to answer questions, but we won't have like a specific, there won't be a day of office hours in between the exam review and the exam itself. So that is a little bit of a drawback. So I would strongly recommend that you have the majority of your questions already prepared when we come into class. Additionally, we will walk through the practice exam. Please work through the practice exam on your own. The whole purpose of me writing a practice exam is so that everybody can work it and figure out what it is that they do know and they need to work on. All right. Also, one thing I will tell you really, really quickly, if you struggle in the first exam, I would strongly recommend that you take diligent notes during the review. I will give you tips and tricks, as well as information about what it is that I'm likely to focus on in the exam. There will definitely be some areas that I will tell you 100% chance on the exam. If I say there's 100% chance on the exam that a particular topic will be there, I'm just going to say it's probably a good idea to study that content. Okay, just for reference. And I won't tell you to the depth, the extent, but I will give you some guidelines on things that I think are important. There were definitely things that over the course of the past 5 chapters that I said, this is important, make sure you study this, and I will reiterate that for the for the exam review. All right, today is going to be a fairly short class. We're just going to go over the chapter 14 homework assignment. Last homework assignment. How do you guys feel? Yeah, it was great. Yeah, it's good to know that this semester is almost over. I mean, there's always mixed feelings. If it's last homework assignment, that means that there's exams and projects coming up, and but that means also the end of the semester is coming up. So then you get to go break, and then you get to come back for the spring, unless you're graduating, which kudos to you if you are graduating. If you're not graduating, then you've got more of it in the spring semester. But it is a little bit of a good prospect and a scary prospect, especially scary for me because I've got a lot of work to do between now and the spring semester. But it is what it is. All right, let's go ahead and let's get talking with this, and we'll get through this pretty quickly. So authentication is a process this is on CSIA exam, Certified Information System Auditors exam. Authentication is the process by which the what. So let's just go ahead and go through the answers. System verifies the user is entitled to the transaction requested. Is that an authentication step? No, it's not really verifying that it's not really verifying the information that they can have access to. But it does, we go to B, verifies the identity of the user. Is that authentication? Yeah, think about authentication. That's what you all do when we are in our other computer room. You have to type in your password, and you have to type in your user ID. Those are authentication steps. So that's a process. Is it also fair to say that authentication can take place using devices? Is that something we can do? And do we ever use devices in authentication? Yeah, the duo factor authentication when you have to log into a Microsoft tool. Yeah, that's an important step as well. There can also be a tracking of the devices. I mentioned geographic analysis. So like, for example, if you get a notification that somebody tried to sign in your account from Siberia, you're probably like saying, I'm not in Siberia currently. That is not me trying to sign in the account. Do not let them log in. Has anybody ever experienced that, by the way? Had some geographic notification on authentication? I've never actually experienced it, but I've heard students talk about that. And that's a scary prospect if somebody's trying to log into your account from a location. Because if that authentication is sent, that means that they've actually cracked your password, which might be a good time to upgrade your password if that's the case. All right. Moving on to question 3. To ensure confidentiality in asymmetric key encryption system, knowledge of which of the following keys is required to decrypt the receive message. So let's go ahead and take a look at this, okay? I want to make sure that we're clear on this because I don't think I've done an effective job explaining this in past semesters. And this is sure to be on the exam, so I want to make sure that we have clear. So we talked about symmetric key encryption. We talked about the nature of symmetric key encryption, but the idea being is that we have the same key that's used by senders and receivers. Okay, it's a private key, and we have to use that exact same private key. So that's a big difference. Is the sender and receiver use the exact same key, which makes sense because usually it's only for transactions that are messages that are sent within an organization. We usually don't have external communications using a symmetric key encryption. It would make sense because it's basically large and costly. So including external stakeholders would be really, really challenging. So same sender's key, same receiver's key, and they use the same exact key. It's a private key that they use for that. Remember, I said it's like a padlock. Okay. Can you have different copies of the key? Absolutely, but it's the exact same key. All right, exact same key. All right. When we talk about asymmetric key encryption, which is the focus of this particular question. This is the one that's usually used for external communication. There is a separate key for senders and receivers, but we're focused on the receiver's key. Okay. So when something's sent out, it's encrypted using a public key, but it's decrypted using the receiver's private key. So what that means is that we actually do a form of encryption that's decryptable using multiple different types of keys, but it's used. They use a public key that is basically accessible for like all receivers. So the way to think about this, obviously the ATM card. Another way to think about this is anybody work in the office up to the Violet Hall with Josh. So basically all of us in the faculty, we have our own key to our office, and we can actually access our offices using those keys. So that we talk about that. That would be our private key. So that's our private key to the offices. But little known secret, I'm not going to tell you where it is or how to access it, but up in the upper office, they've actually got something called the bone key, which is a skeleton key that can unlock all the offices upstairs in Upper Violet Hall. Now that I've given you that information, you can violate controls if you really, really want to, okay? But that would be an example of the public key, okay? Something that is accessible for everybody that can access all of these same systems simultaneously. So we encrypt using the public key, and we decrypt using the private key. And just so you know, if you start decrypting my office using that skeleton key upstairs, which means you break into my office using that skeleton key, I will find you, all right? I will find you. Dr. Caden has done that in the past. She did that for my 50th birthday. I will tell you right now, I've never been so thrilled to actually have people celebrate my birthday and so dismayed to try to walk into my office when all the streamers and balloons are there. She actually had a GTRA do GTRA hours. That's how you could tell it was kind of crazy because I could not move in my office. It was so insane. And part of me was like, okay, I guess that really defeats the purpose of controls if anybody can access my office whenever they want to. So I'm going to rant about that a lot. All right. Anyway, again, receiver public key, receiver private key. So this is only focused on the receiver side on the asymmetric key encryption, which makes sense because these are usually going to be external participants to the system. Going back to the homework. All right. So an asymmetric key encryption, knowledge which of the following keys is required to decrypt the receive message. So encryption is done using the receiver's private key, receiver's public key. My apologies, like the bone key. Decryption is done using the receiver's private key. So for decryption, it would be A only, so which would be A is the answer 1. I don't know why it says A up here and then say for A for 1. That's just bizarre. I think, yeah, that's bizarre. This should be 1 and 2. It's one of those little things. I've noticed a lot of little errors in the homework assignment, just little stupid little errors, especially like things like that. Let's just go ahead and say receiver's private key is how we decrypt right here and move on and ignore all this down here. All right. Question number five. Question number five. To ensure data sent over the internet are protected, which of the following keys is required to decrypt, or sorry, to encrypt the data before transmission using an asymmetric key encryption method? So very similar question, but we're talking about encryption. All right. So decryption occurs using a private key. Okay. Encryption occurs using the receiver's public key, which would answer D for that one. All right. Now, what is the meaning of that? Yeah, that's a little bit more technical, we note, but again, I do want you to remember that in asymmetric key encryption, it's the public key that's responsible for encryption. It's the private key that's responsible for decryption. And remembering that is important. Easy way to think about it again is like you can use the skeleton key method, or you can just remember the ATM card. Either one of those are fine. All right. Question number 7. Incentive to commit fraud will usually include all the following except what? So again, this goes into the fraud risk factors, which we labeled as the fraud triangle. So there are 3 aspects to the fraud triangle. There's the incentive or pressure, okay, incentive or pressure. There's opportunity, and then we're going to talk about attitude or rationalization. And we got a little bit of detail about that, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. But these are some basic questions about that. So which of the following represent incentive or pressure? So can we say financial pressure represents an incentive or pressure? Has pressure in the name, so we're going to say probably it's going to be a pressure. What about personal habits or lifestyle? Like say, for example, you were really big on going out and taking your private luxury yacht out onto the lake here in Kirksville every week, and you need to afford that. So yeah, that might be a lifestyle choice. That might be a pressure, okay, to be able to afford that. Feelings of resentment, that's an interesting one. So you think you're applying for a promotion in your job, and you said, you know what, we're not going to hire you. We're not going to promote you. We don't think that you're doing the job well enough that you've been promotion. Is that going to be an incentive to kind of like commit fraud against your company, saying, yeah, they suck. I'm going to steal all the money that I can from them because they won't promote me. Is that incentive? Yeah. Okay. It is. Alcohol, drug, or gambling addiction, that kind of goes back to the personal habits or lifestyle. Those are tied back to one another. So inadequate segregation of duties, that is not an incentive or pressure. What would that be characterized in our fraud risk factors? Opportunity. Yeah, opportunity. It's going to be an opportunity. Okay. So important to make those distinctions. Remember when we talk about the fraud risk factors or the fraud triangle, all 3 of these have to be present in some capacity, not present in some capacity, present in some capacity in order for fraud to occur. So if we, as people who are managing the system, can minimize opportunity, we can minimize fraud taking place. We really can't control incentive pressure or attitude rationalization, though it's important for us to be aware of those particular concepts. All right. Question number 9. A message digest is a result of hashing. Which of the following statements about the hashing process is true? So we talked a little bit about hashing, and you want to be have some familiarity with it. Remember, hashing is not reversible, okay? But it doesn't actually ensure privacy or confidentiality. Basically, all that it ensures is that the result of the file that was sent is the exact same item as the file that's received. And if you really want to get in the hashing process, the hashing encryption using those simultaneously together, it's very complex. There's some interesting YouTube videos about it, but it is so far beyond what I'm going to teach you in this class. It's just mostly if your own personal interest in it. So all that we want to know here is that a hashing process is saying, this is the file that was sent. It's identical to the file that was received. Okay. Question number 10. Which of the following vulnerabilities would create the most serious risk to a firm? Now, this is an interesting question because I think that there's a lot of ways you can approach this. So keep in mind when we're answering this question, we're not talking about things that might lead to a threat. We're talking about something that actually represents a threat. So a clear and present danger currently. All of these could represent risks, practically speaking, but we want to identify the one that represents the actual obvious threat immediately. So using open source software downloaded for free on the firm's network, could that lead to something problematic in the future? Certainly, okay. Certainly, if we're using an open source network, there's examples of that. Like, is anybody familiar with Malwarebytes? Like using malware scanning software, that's available for free. But if you're really concerned about your network system at an organization, you probably want to have the paid version, something that's tailored for your particular organization. So making sure that you're using good software that's going to be consistent, that's certainly something we would be concerned about. But that doesn't in itself is not a risk. That could lead to problems in the future. So again, Could it be problematic? Yes, but is it a clear and present problem right now? Not really. Employees recording passwords in Excel files. Okay. Is that a problem? Well, it could definitely lead to a problem, especially if those Excel files are accessed. If somebody gets access to the Excel file, they'll actually be able to escalate privilege pretty easily. Okay. That being said, that is not a risk in and of itself. It's something that could lead to a problem in the future. Employees writing instant messages with friends during office hours, okay, that could be problematic, especially if proprietary information is shared, but that in itself doesn't represent a risk right now. The only one that really represents a current risk is unauthorized access to the firm's network. That is when something has happened. That's a problem that has happened and has to be addressed right here and now. So I don't necessarily like this question. I wouldn't ask a question like this on the exam, but I do think it's worth talking about to understand that there's a difference between things that create or that could potentially lead to a problem and something that's an existing problem within the system altogether. All right, moving on to question 14. The symmetric key encryption method, is it slow? What do you guys think? Yes, no, maybe, I don't know. Either of those questions are acceptable except on the exam. You don't want to put I don't know on the exam. Okay. It is not slow. Symmetric key is the fastest one. Okay. That's the fastest one. It is not appropriate for encrypting large data sets. It's actually very appropriate for encrypting large data sets. That's why we use it. Okay. And it solves problems in key distribution and key management. It does not, because keep in mind that key distribution and key management would be problematic if you talk about external stakeholders, because we can't use symmetric key encryption for external stakeholders. So it is fast. It is generally used by organizations for internal transmissions, but it can actually manage large data sets. We use that for managing transactions or messages that occur within the organization because of their speed and because of the security that's allowed. That being said, the other one's asymmetric key encryption. That's the one we use for external transmissions. That is the one that usually solves the issues with public and private keys, because that way we can actually manage keys that are not held by the organization itself. So it does use the same key for both senders and receivers in the encryption and decryption, because it's all stakeholders in the organization. All people in the organization are using the exact same key. Okay, so D is our answer to this one. Fraud triangle indicates which of the following conditions exist for a fraud to be perpetrated. We just talked about this earlier. Okay, 3 aspects of the fraud triangle, which I absolutely expect you to know: incentive for pressure, opportunity, attitude, or rationalization. Which one of those is not listed? Legal environment's not one of those things. Legal environment, I mean, I don't know. We got that class, legal environment business, and I suspect that Scotty Templeton has committed fraud at some point in his career. That's just between you and I. Okay, but legal environment by itself, that's not a fraud risk factor. Okay, not a fraud risk factor. All right. To prevent repudiation and conduct e-business. What does repudiation mean, by the way? Did anybody have to go to a doctor to look up in a dictionary to figure out what one was? Okay. Repudiation basically means we're not doing business with you. Okay. We were going to do business, but we disagree because we don't like the way you handle business. That's repudiation. So companies must be able to authenticate their trading partners, which makes sense, because if you want to do business with somebody externally, they're going to say, all right, we want to make sure that if we send you money, that it's actually coming to you and it's not going to go to a foreign account. And then you're going to say you owe us money. So we have to have secure connection. So which of the following encryption methods can be used for authentication purposes? Wow, that was a lot of explanation for basically a simple question. So let's just go ahead and go through this. Can we use symmetric key encryption to authenticate with trading partners? What do you guys think? Yes or no? 50-50 chance. So symmetric key encryption is used for single organization only, for an internal organization transaction. So if we're talking about trading partners, are those internal stakeholders? No, those are external stakeholders. We cannot use symmetric key encryption for accessing trading partners because those are outside of our organization. We can only use asymmetric key encryption. Okay, so B is our answer. That's the only one that we can utilize in this situation. All right. Question number 20 was our last one, I believe. Oh yeah, okay. We're going to talk a lot more about the different types of controls. So we have preventive, detective, or corrective controls. What is encryption? Encryption is what type of control? It's a system control, Dr. Barnes. You are right, but that's not one of the answers. Okay. You guys think? How many think preventive? It is a preventive control. Yes, it is a preventive control. Yes, because we're trying to prevent any unauthorized access to the detail that's being conveyed. So yeah, we're talking about preventive control in there. We're going to talk a little bit more about that because I want to break down one of the questions that we're going to look at in a little bit more detail. So let's go to our problems. All right. So this is pretty straightforward. We're going to talk about the natures of symmetric key encryption and asymmetric key encryption and the features of those. Again, please make sure that you study those two slides and have familiarity with those. I will ask questions on symmetric key encryption and the differences between asymmetric key encryption, but all that content is pretty much encapsulated within those two slides that we talked about. So which one's good for large data sets? What do you guys think? Symmetric key or asymmetric key? Symmetric key. It's going to be one or the other that doesn't give you option for both, unfortunately. So slow in processing. That's asymmetric. Okay. Convenient for key distribution and key management. That's asymmetric because that's going to be how we operate externally. Each user has a public key and a private key. It's going to be asymmetric. And then good for authentication. Asymmetric. Yes. So all of them are asymmetric except for the first one. The first one is symmetric. Okay. All right, now there's an interesting question. So here's what I'd like to do. Here's what I'd like to do is that we've got some items here that talk about system availability. And interestingly, you'll notice there's only 5 items, but there's 6 different controls that are listed here, which means one of these is used twice. All right, so hopefully you identified that. In addition to identifying what the correct answer is to each of these, I'd like to talk about whether they are preventive or corrective control, because this was the last slide we talked about I talked about in the slides on Monday. Which everybody watched. I know that everybody watched it because I monitor those things. You know, I don't know honestly, but I'm assuming you watched it. So yeah, everybody watched this, and we're going to talk about which of these are, but we're also going to talk about whether it's preventative or corrective. Remember, in the last discussion, we don't have detective controls in this particular category. They would be associated with detective controls, but usually when we talk about these types of issues, we don't need a detective control because usually like a system outage, we don't need a detection control to identify. Like if all the lights go out and the computer stop working, we can say, oh yeah, there's a failure right there. We don't need a control to tell us the failure exists. All right. Activities required to keep the firm running during a period of displacement or interruption of normal operations. Okay, so this is basically a protocol that says if something happens, we want the business to continue operating as planned, at least to some degree. Okay, so there's not going to be an interruption in service. All right. So first of all, what is being described in this particular phrase right here? What are these 5 items? That's a philosophy of business continuity management. Continuity management, yes. And what category is this going to do we say this is? So something bad has happened. Something has basically happened to the organization. And we're trying to say, we know the bad things have happened. We're going to try to address those problems. But for the right now, we need to address the clear and present issue, which is making sure that our operations stay up and running. Okay. It's a corrective control. Business continuity management is a corrective control. Okay. I made notations here, and even I just did that. I just realized that I wrote down D for detective control instead of C for corrective control. Man, I'm really old. Yeah. So yeah, corrective control. I did said it right this time. All right. Process that identifies significant events that may threaten a firm's operations and outline the procedures to ensure that the firm will resume operations if such events occur. So something bad happens. Our systems have been taken offline. We want to get them back up and running as soon as possible. So this is different from the first one. The first one was saying continuous operation. We want to make sure that the operations keep up and going. This one's saying things are down. Let's get them up and back and running as soon as possible. So what's that called? Disaster recovery planning. Disaster recovery planning. Okay. Disaster recovery planning. What does that sound like to you guys? Preventative or corrective? Corrective. Yes, it's corrective. Okay. Service model in which a third-party service provider offers computing resources, including hardware and software applications, to cloud users over the internet. Boy, that was a real tricky one to figure out here. And the service provider charges on a per unit basis. So which system availability term relates to cloud use? What do you guys think? Think it's cloud computing? Okay, I'm going to give you guys a gold star for that one. Yeah, cloud computing. All right, cloud computing, is that a preventive or corrective control? So we prevent bad things from happening to our information if we store it on the cloud, because if our system here goes down, we've actually got cloud protocols that store that information, store that hardware and software for us. Okay, so cloud computing is a preventive control. Clear, define, and document a plan that covers key personnel resources, including IT infrastructure and applications and actions required to carry out in order to continue or resume system for critical business functions. This one's a little bit confusing because it says continue or resume the systems. Okay, I want you to focus on resume the systems and ignore the continue, because that creates a little bit of confusion. Because the way that it's described, it could be either BCM or DRP. But this is more likely to explain disaster recovery planning. Okay, You know, if you said business continuity management because you saw continue, I don't blame you. This is poorly worded, but basically what's being described here is disaster recovery planning, which we said is a preventive or corrective control. Corrective, yes, corrective control. All right. Using redundant units to provide a system with the ability to continue functioning when a part of the system fails. So the system itself goes down, or it's not system, a part of the system goes down, but the system itself maintains operationality. Okay. I actually defined that in the video. What is that called? That's fault tolerance. Okay. Fault tolerance. If one bad thing happens, it doesn't make everything bad happen. Okay. We can maintain operations and when part of the system goes down. That sure sounds like if it's preventing the system from going down, it sure sounds like a preventive control. Can we all agree to that? Yes, it is preventive control. Device using battery power to enable system to operate long enough to back up critical data and shut down properly and during the loss of power. Okay, that loss of power is probably a big clue on that one. What do you guys think? Uninterruptible power supply? Yeah, that's the battery backup right there. And we're trying to make sure that bad things don't happen to our information or our server or system. So that's going to be preventive. Yes, very good. All right. So I asked you guys a little bit beyond that, but I would expect you to be knowledgeable about that. All right, last question for today, and I guess forever, except for the quiz or the exam. All right, last homework question forever. Yeah, no more homework questions ever again. I'm doing away with them in all my classes. Wouldn't that be great if we didn't have homework? Yeah, I dream of a time when there's no exams and no homework. Everybody just comes in because they want to learn. Okay, that's still going to remain a dream. Yeah, still going to remain a dream. So we got some scenarios here, and it says to identify the incentive, opportunity, and rationalization present in each case. I will say that these examples are poorly written because they don't provide clear identification of all of these. I do think it's important to focus on the most important one, which is going to be the opportunity. But let's talk about all three, and we may have to speculate in some of these scenarios, and we have to provide speculation, which is fine, but we're going to clearly identify the opportunity in each of these scenarios. So an employee of the telecommunications payroll department moved to a new position within the department in which she no longer has had privileged access to the payroll accounts. However, when changing positions, her access rights to the payroll accounts were left unchanged. An associate told her he was starting a financial service business and needed some contact information. Using the privileged access rights she retained, the employee provided her associate with confidential information of many employees, including 401k account numbers, credit card numbers, and social security. That was awfully nice of her. Yeah, which he then used to commit 100 cases of identity theft. All right, well, that was not so cool. The senator's actions caused more than $1 million worth of damages to the firm and its employees. Okay, so obviously, I said I wanted to focus on the opportunity. So let's talk about the opportunity first. What is the key issue here, the opportunity that should have been addressed in this particular scenario?
Her access rights were unchanged.
That's right. Yeah. So change position, her access rights did not change in that scenario. That should have been something that was addressed in the problem. So she had the opportunity to actually access information, which no longer had privileged position. Now we have to speculate on the rest. Okay. Speculate on the rest because out of the grace of your heart, are you going to do something like that for your friends? Says, you know what? I'm starting a financial services business. Could you give me these people's credit card information? So that's something that you would normally just be kind of like, you know what? That's fine. I don't see any harm coming of this whatsoever. Yeah. By the way, if you're at that position, go ahead and leave your credit card information with me at the end of class. Okay. I promise nothing bad will happen to it. I'm just going to take those numbers down for safekeeping. Okay. Yeah. Don't do that. Don't do that. So, what are some incentives here? So is it possible that she felt a little bit jilted that she got her position, her access to that information revoked? It's like, yeah, okay, this seems like a demotion to me. I'm not real happy about changing positions. I was happy in my other position. That could be an incentive right there. Okay. What about the rationalization? What about the rationalization? There, we could actually talk about innocent rationalization and nefarious rationalization. So innocent rationalization would be like, well, maybe this is my supervisor and they're requesting for a legitimate business purpose. So I have to access the information. I have access to it and they're just asking me before it gets revoked. Sure, I'm going to provide it. That would be an innocent rationalization. What about a nefarious rationalization? Say, yeah, this company's done me wrong and they deserve to have all their information stolen. They deserve to have $1 million worth of damages done to them. Yeah. We don't like to think of nefarious rationalization, but unfortunately it does occur. By the way, those are not technical terms. I'm not going to ask you the difference between innocent rationalization and nefarious rationalization. Those are just, nefarious is a word I like to use. Okay. All right, database of manager check authorization and credit card processing company went beyond his authorized computer access rights. The employee obtained firm's consumer information of 8.4 million individuals. Stolen information included names and addresses, bank information, credit and debit card information. He sold the data to telemarketers over a 5-year period. All right, Opportunity again, what do we got here? Went beyond their authorized computer rights access. That's called elevation or escalation of privilege. The idea being that you have one level that you're supposed to operate on. Instead, you're able to bypass that and get additional privileges that you normally wouldn't have access to. Usually this happens when there's inadequate segregation of duties in an organization, or some people don't take control protocol seriously. Remember, we were talking about Excel files with passwords earlier. If somebody in your department just basically leaves their computer open and unlocked and they've got their Excel file passwords, you're like, okay, password is chicken123. Okay. And then just go ahead, put that down, write that down, and you can access their system. All right. That would be an example of escalation of privilege. Other parts of it could be the system itself is corrupt and doesn't control who has access. So you're only supposed to be able to access sales rep or sales input data, but you can access purchase data as well. That might be an example of our NetSuite authorization that we have. Remember, in NetSuite, we're administrators, so we can access parts of the system we normally wouldn't be able to as users. That might be an example of that. But incentive and rationalization, those are a little bit more subtle. Incentive, there's really no clue about who did this. If they went and bypassed their system, it's probably for financial purposes. Maybe there's some trends, some pressures like financial gain. But the rationalization is a little bit more. If you're selling data to telemarketers or a 5-year period, you're just kind of like, okay, I need the money. Okay, that was my rationalization, is that I can sell this data and I get money for it. And yeah, it's going to be somewhat harmless. It's only 8.4 million records. That's all. By the way, how much money would you guys have in order to have? How much money would you have to receive in order to commit a fraud like this? Just out of curiosity, 8.4 million records. Would you insist on $1 per record? $8.4 million. Yeah, so it'd be good retirement nest egg. Okay. Yeah, some people go like, I know I need a lot more money than that, Dr. Barnes. The risk is not worth that reward. Okay. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. That's an interesting speculative question. So for no money whatsoever, Dr. Barnes, I'm a purely ethical person. And if you answered that, kudos to you. Okay. I don't believe you, but kudos to you. All right. An IT consultant working on a contract for an offshore oil platform was denied an offer for a permanent job within the same company. He then accessed the firm's computer systems without approval and caused damage by impairing the integrity and the availability of the data. All right. So accessing the firm's computer system without approval, that's a pretty easy opportunity right there. Okay. If there's ability to access the system and you don't need the approval to do that, then what's bypassing you? What's stopping that? That's one reason why we actually have the control systems in place, why we have remember, we have the application controls in the IT systems that prevent us from accessing particular areas, or not application, sorry, general access controls. I got those confused. General access controls. So usually system defines what can be accessed by a particular individual. This one appears to be a simple approval mechanism, and they were able to access information that was not approved. So maybe a spreadsheet they shouldn't have access to, or maybe a part of the system that they could not operate otherwise. Incentive here. What do you guys think? If you're working really hard as a contractor, it's like, I'm doing my best work here. They're bound to give me a job. And they say, no, we're going to hire somebody else. You're going to be gone in a week. It's like, would you be a little ticked off if that was the case? Yeah, I can see that. That seems to be an incentive. Okay. It also probably makes for a good rationalization. So they should hire me and they're not. They deserve what happens to them. Okay. They deserve what happens to them. Yeah. And then when I talk about the fraud triangle in auditing, I intend to talk about it from a classroom perspective. Like, why might you cheat in a classroom? And the rationalization off is that Dr. Barnes is kind of a jerk, you know? So yeah, that would be an easy rationalization. If the company is a jerk to you, then they deserve what happens to them. Final one, manager responsible for payment authorization hired an offshore programmer to insert a couple of contractors to insert to the vendor table of the company's database. He then authorized payments to the independent contractors for fictitious services and personal gain. He spent the stolen money on luxury items and extravagant purchases for himself, his family, and friends. Interestingly enough, this is something that comes up a lot in frauds like this, is that these are usually people who are living well beyond their means, whether that because of some sort of addiction they have that they are funding, or just that they enjoy the lifestyle. That's something that comes up quite a lot in this type of fraud, which we can kind of label as a misappropriation of assets in this situation. But that would be an easy incentive and easy rationalization. Incentive is, I need the money. Rationalization is, I need the money. They're kind of the same idea. But what about the opportunity here? Is that kind of scary? Is that you have authorization in one area and then you can hire somebody to take care of the recording in another area? That seems more problematic if that's the way the system operates. Because remember, we should have separation of those responsibilities: custody, authorization, recording. And this says they hired somebody to insert a couple of contractors in the vendor table. So they added contract to the vendor table, which is a recording function, and the person who's authorizing the payment was able to do that. So certainly problematic in that regard. But that's a very clear opportunity if the system itself allows actions like this. That would be something that if I was doing a review of this as a forensic examiner, I said, how did the offshore programmer get access to this information in the first place? All right, well, we're done with all of our chapters. We're in for Friday for exam review, so please make sure you're prepared for that. I'll see you all then.